Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Okay, try two didn't go any better. Introductions, come on.
Okay, today we have invited a very special guest from Mexico who is currently living in the wonderful country of Peru. This friend of mine is named Alejandro Reyes, and we have known each other since the sixth grade. Um, Alejandro Reyes, welcome to the Pickle BoyZ. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I'm really glad you invited me today.
It is also important to note that Wilfred will not be joining us today due to a problem of internet. Okay.
So, initiating ourselves with the topic at hand, which is going to be about immigration in general, we invited Alejandro here today because he is, of course, a citizen and a person born in Mexico. And as we all know, there's a huge conflict of interest between the United States border security and Mexican immigrants. So, first of all, we just like to ask Alejandro Reyes his personal opinions regarding the subject of immigration of Mexicans into the United States.
Well, where to begin? It all goes to the core of the same country. For me, it is mostly how the economy and how the world functions around Mexico. Mexico, it's a country where, in order for you to survive and progress, you need to have a lot of contact, let's say that. So Mexico is based a lot of your social relationships in between persons. You've all caught that for now?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
checking if it actually worked. Okay. So in Mexico, and most people thought that, let's say, what we know as the American dream would be Mexico City. But little did they know that Mexico City doesn't take well a lot of, let's say, what they would call themselves, like they would call them intruders, but and for them they're just trying to have a better life. So they will go to Mexico City just to know that their opportunities are as bad as where they come from. So when that happens, a lot of people through the years have noticed that has, let's say, like a scheme of power where only people that know each other can like success that place. So when people from the outskirts of Mexico City or the provinces learn that, and they look for new opportunities. And as we know, Mexico doesn't have the best public education system. Their education isn't the best, and their work is. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's more common to find in Mexico as there's a large quantity of numbers of them. So they look for new opportunities in the outside, and mostly they look for in the States as it's easier to cross the border there than trying to get a plane ticket or a visa for another place. And as well, they look for the States as the same job they would do in Mexico. They would get paid a lot better in the States as they may be from the best. And they look for new opportunities for their family as they want them to have a good education or a better chance of a better life.
What extent do you believe that violence and the Mexican drug cartels play a role in this migration that we can see today?
Well, I don't think it plays a really big part as Mexico's cartels are known for helping people in need. For like right now in the quarantine, a really big Mexico cartel that is that forms the Pacific, the Gulf of Mexico, and they gave food to all of those in need, and they started taking care of them. So for that, violence is not really the key part in this. People, if there's a breakout of violence, they will tend to migrate, but only inside Mexico, going with their family members in other zones of Mexico.
You're saying that the bigger problem for this mass migration isn't the drug cartels as portrayed by the media, but it is the social institutions which have been implemented in Mexico since the revolution in the 1930s.
Yeah, exactly that. Because the solemn base of Mexico is corrupt, corrupt in the way that we try to fool ourselves that we have an opportunity, but indeed we only see that the people that have contacts are able to get in position of power. That's why it's really rare for somebody outside from Mexico to get to a position in high power.
What are your opinions regarding Donald Trump's actions as well as his inflammatory statements regarding illegal immigrants in the United States?
Well, for me, I guess his solemn campaign is based on that and about the hatred towards illegal immigrants. So I feel in a way it's wrong, but I do get where he's going, where he's going and where he's coming from, because me myself in Mexico, I know that well, let me start again. I feel that what he's doing with them, like treating them like he treats them, it's wrong. But I don't think the cause for what he's like fighting is wrong, because if everybody would be able to travel everywhere and stay there, the world wouldn't function.
Basically, illegal immigration is wrong, and the systems implemented in both countries have been ineffective in both combating the the move that these Mexican immigrants are taking, as well as the measures being taken by the United States border security and to prevent this illegal immigration from happening.
Yes.
So I got a question. In your point of view, being a Mexican, do you sympathize more with the immigrants, and you see the reasons, and you are more in favor of their reasons? Do you think that their reasons for moving to another country, even if it's illegal, outweighs the point of view of some of the points that people from the U.S. make to counter or to go against this immigration?
Well, I sympathize more with the illegal Mexicans or illegal immigrants in general, as me seeing how things work in Mexico. I don't blame them for trying to move to other places. I cannot blame them. Me myself, if I would be in his position, wouldn't be able to try to contain myself to look for a better opportunity. As imagine being in a place that you cannot progress and you are only stay stable in a single level. It would be impossible to try to contain yourself from trying to strive for more. So in that way, I sympathize for them, because I do not blame them for trying to get more in their possession and trying to have a better lifestyle.
So, where do you think that Mexico fails, and what can Mexico do to improve and address the situation?
Well, it would be really hard, but I feel a good place to start to address the situation would be to have a better education system, a public education system, as Mexico is really divided into, what I mean by divided is mainly in classes divided, as there's mostly people that are really rich or people that are really poor. And the people that are really poor don't get any type of opportunity to a good education. So implementing a better education system in Mexico will help address the situation, as they will have better opportunities in going to study a good universities in Mexico, as one of the best universities in Mexico is actually public, and it's known and it's renowned across the world.
Okay.
So now, moving into the theme of mass immigration around the world, I think we can pretty much agree that some of the biggest immigration events recently have been the Rohingya Muslims, the immigration due to the violence in the Middle East, of course, the Mexican mass immigration, as well as the Venezuelan mass immigration. So how do we believe that these different cases of immigration, all for a variety of reasons, can relate to each other? where do you find similarities between all of these cases?
I mean, it's all not. It's there is many factors involved, but I wouldn't say there's a variety of reasons. It's always the same reason for why someone would take the risk of moving somewhere else, that is to have a better overall quality of life. If the place you were before is dangerous and it's not safe, and you cannot even maintain yourself on the state that the country might be in, you always want to move to a place where you know you'll be safer and be able to prosper better. So the immigration all throughout history is due because of this. And even though these cases that you just explained, the bad state that the countries are that the immigrants move from are in this state due to a variety of reasons. The overall problem of immigration stems all from the same factor.
Which is?
Well, I just said it.
But I don't think that was a well-defined factor.
Okay, it's not a factor, it's a state. It's a state of
Unsatisfaction.
dissatisfaction, or not. What would be the opposite of well-being?
Well-being.
Yes. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so why do you think that there are people across the world? Let's take India. People who live in slums on less than 10 cents a day who don't immigrate. Yet there are people who are in all of these different places that we have just stated, who feel the need that they have to move, even though they're in the same discomfort and they're lacking the same basic necessities as the people who are not immigrating.
Well, because people in India do not have the same capability of immigration as those other examples. In Asia and Africa, they are next to very modernized countries such as Europe. And in the case of Venezuela, they are literally surrounded by developed or in the process of development countries. In India, the surrounding countries are basically the same. Okay, India does have China, which is a very developed country, but I would say that the well-being of its citizens isn't that much better compared to what other immigrants get going to places like Europe.
Why do you believe that? No. How come there's usually a shift between welcoming and discrimination once these immigrants are in the place where they find themselves comfortable and they find themselves in a place where they have jobs, they have security, they're able to assimilate themselves into this new society? Where do you guys see the line which differentiates the welcoming that most countries give to these people, and then the lashback which occurs due to basically this, what most people who don't believe in immigration call basically these immigrants taking over their country? What causes this drastic shift? I know Reyes and I, we lived in Peru, and Peru was considered by most Spanish and Latin American newspapers as the most welcoming country to Venezuelan immigrants in 2017. And then in 2018, once we saw a huge population of Venezuelans coming to Peru due to this, due to the reason seen in the newspapers, which is that Peru was more hospitable, the whole country began to change. The whole demographics began to change, and we saw a huge divide between Peruvians and Venezuelans who had been living relatively peacefully for 3 years together, and then who had been basically thrust into disarray, thrust into conflict with each other, and basically seen as these criminals who had come to their country only looking to take away their jobs, their food, their health, their security.
I think that it really does fall back on the mentality of people. So, for example, if we're saying for the first 3 years we see a wave of immigration that's small or relative medium, let's say, rather than large, we're gonna see that this first wave of immigrants are gonna, let's take for example jobs. Let's focus on jobs. The current population does not want to do, or as its first choice, a very low-paying job that probably like has to deal with, like, for example, picking up garbage, for example. So the first wave of immigrants, they will be looking for money, and it's likely that they'll take over for these jobs, the lower ones that sustain and help out. However, and that's okay, because then at first you're filling up some jobs and like you're welcoming them, and it's already affecting you in a sense. But then as the second wave comes, which is much larger because of the positive image that the country gained, let's take Peru, I feel that like the population begins to feel that the second wave will come along, and they're gonna see that a bunch of the jobs that before were available are not available because now they're taken, and then slowly, they're gonna be able to they're gonna start taking over the jobs that people desire more, and I think that it's really based on the perception of the person on the waves and how they see it.
I think that's a very good point, because when we look, and this is a point that I don't know if Ali Freirichs, one of our first guests, made in our podcast, but I know that she's mentioned it, and she said that people in the Andean regions are generally less happy than people in the Caribbean or Atlantic regions of South America or of Latin America, and this is because you see a change in climate. And although this is a very simple and underwhelming statement, it is factually true, and you can see that this change in you can see this change of personality, this differing of personalities, when an employer compares a Peruvian and a Venezuelan who are trying to get the same job. Let's say that they're in the restaurant business and they want to hire a new waiter. When they see a Peruvian who is purely service oriented, who is not charismatic, who wants to do his job and get his paycheck because he is relatively comfortable in his own country and knows that he has a family which is serving this person, because family is a very integral part of Latin America, as we all know. And then we look at a Venezuelan who is going to be working his ass off, who is very charismatic due to his Caribbean nature or Atlantic nature and the actual culture of Venezuela that we saw before Maduro's coming to power. And we see that these people are going to be going, they're not going to be just doing their job. They're going to be going up and ahead so that they can get the promotion, they can get the raise, so that they one day might be able to become the manager, or they might be able to have money to start their own business. So we see this difference between comfort and strife, and we see that the person who has strife has more motivation to go above and beyond, and to instead of depending on their family, make a life for their family and create the security that they were lacking for so many years. And this causes a huge, in my opinion, a huge rift between these two communities, because we see one community which has lived normally, not doing anything extraordinary for forever, and then we see a wave of immigrants who are more able to connect with the customers, who are getting higher tips, who are bringing more business to the restaurant, let's say, and making friends with some of the customers, which are in turn bringing them back. And we see that this causes jealousy, because there is an obvious change in the local economy and the different what's it called? The different wealth that is brought into the area, and we see this huge rift all over the world when these immigrants come. And we can also see that in Europe, which we'll get into later.
Yeah, I agree with what Andres is saying, especially because, and then I think that in this scenario is when, for example, the question of identity falls in, because we can see, as you said, this new wave of immigrants that begin to, like, as you said, work their ass off and go up and beyond, and then they start to rise. They start to make their presence known, and then, for example, let's continue with the example of Peru. Peruvians feel that oh, they're taking over our jobs, we're losing, and then they fall back into the argument of identity. We're losing our identity as a culture, we're losing our identity as our country, and then the question of if immigration does it strengthen identity or does it damage it comes into question, and the answer to that question will really depend on the perspective and the culture of that place.
Well, yeah. So, because of this, because we just said that a difference in culture really changes a society's perspective towards immigration. Uh, how do you feel this plays a part when it comes to uh, world politics? For example, with countries such as Italy not allowing immigrants to enter its country and literally keeping like lifeguard boats full of immigrants over which are in overcapacity with children with sick ones not and not letting this boat come to its shores and
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Hugo. And
thanks.
I think that I do sympathize with the refugees that, for example, with the example of Italy, go there to seek a new home because of the situation. But I think that it is also, okay, from my personal opinion, I don't see it wrong like a country puts its domestic issues before its international issues. I don't see anything wrong. I do understand that its consequences and backlash, but that's also valid. You can't take them away. If they have to focus on themselves, then like that's their thing, and we have to respect that. And Italy allowed a lot of refugees enter the country, but they reach a limit when they can't allow anymore, because besides helping the others, they also gotta take care of themselves. And then because they say no, and they look like the bad guys. But then I think in those scenarios is when like us as an international community, we need to come together and address this issue and help it out. Because we cannot just rely on Italy taking everybody in. We can't. We gotta find also another way. And if Italy can't take any more people because of whatever reason, then we gotta come together and find a solution to that problem.
I think it is also very important to note that Italy has a form of government which is right wing and populist, and so like it or not, this plays a big factor on a country's standpoint towards immigration, with more leftist type of government being more lenient towards immigration, while more right types of government uh, are less don't allow such immigration to happen in their country, and so let each country be right or wrong. I'm not saying that the right is wrong in not generally not letting immigrants in, but I think it's very important to note that in many countries that are more lenient to the right, like such as Italy, immigration, or this also applies to the United States now that I think about it, with Trump being a Republican, it generally, these types of politicians are less lenient towards immigration, while more socialist types of politicians are more willing to allow immigration.
And I believe that this factor which you just brought up is very important, because we could see that in part due to the mass immigration of these Middle Eastern people to Europe as a whole, there was a huge lashback by especially the Italians, and we saw this in the form of the first populist government since Mussolini coming into power. And honestly, Italy is a country in Europe which suffers tremendously when it comes to economics
Mm.
because they have a very big reputation and they love to flaunt the reputation. But when it comes to the natural resources that they have, their local economies sustaining themselves on their own with their own small businesses, they're a very weak country, and the European Union helps them way more than they should. But
Mm.
also, we have to keep in mind that Europe as a whole is very small. They can only fit so many people, and there are only so many places which these immigrants can go.
Mm.
Case in point being Germany. Germany is still divided between West and East. The West and East being the borders of East Germany and West Germany during the Cold War. East Germany was controlled by the Soviets, and because of this, you can see that there's a very conservative incentive in these people, while the West was controlled by the Americans, and we can see that they're relatively more left leaning, or more moderate, we could say, more practical, in my opinion. Uh, but in Germany, in recent years, we've seen a huge rise in the amount of nationalist groups created and members joined. And in 2015, at the height of the immigration crisis in Europe, we saw that there were millions of immigrants coming into Germany, especially, and establishing themselves in the metropolitan areas in the West. And once the traditional people of Germany see this, they're obviously not going to like it because it's these foreigners who are basically taking over the country, who are mingling with other Germans. And by the way, Germany is one of the countries in Europe which has the most immigrants, which had the most immigrants to begin with. And you just see a huge diversity when you go into the West, and you see a lot of white when you go to the east of Germany. So while East Germany, it holds a view of conserving the traditions of Germany. And although it is racist, conserving the genealogy of Germany, we can see that due to their amount of low population, fortunately, this crisis created by ISIS primarily, and all of these terrorist groups, has created such a divide between conservatives in Germany and progressives in Germany, because we see that, as Hugo had said, there's a sharp contrast between the left and the right when it comes to policy regarding immigration. And obviously Angela Merkel allowed millions of Middle Eastern people who are controversial in Western culture to begin with to come into the country. And obviously they're taking jobs because, as we had just discussed, when you have people who are suffering, they have more incentive to work harder. And we can see that there's this immigration. While it is positive for the economy, it is not positive for the social identity with the people who were in the country to begin with. And this has just caused, once again, a huge rift between traditionalists and progressives, and has caused even more controversy than what we could have even imagined could happen with this immigration crisis in Europe.
Mm.
Okay. Well, I think we should change gears because we discussed a lot of the geopolitics. We should, I think, of the examples we're giving, uh, because of with all the examples we've been given, it's very centered around migration, kind of the same type. But now I think we should discuss more about Venezuela and maybe return later towards Italy, because in the case of Venezuela, it's not that much different, but we need to take in consideration that these countries that are the main providers of migration, if you can put it that way, are underdeveloped and were underdeveloped from the start. But in the case of Venezuela, it was one of the most developed Central America, South American countries, like 20, 30 years ago, and due to bad government has now created such a bad economic state that its citizens are literally fleeing the country in I don't know how much.
It's an incredible amount, and it's a very brutal path to freedom. Well, Venezuela is such a complicated issue because you see, well, primarily you see this huge amount of inflation, which causes poverty, which causes violence, and this chain of events just leads to such
Even more.
disorientation. Such disorientation within the people that there's no other choice but to leave, because when you have people, when there's a scarcity of medicine and when there's a scarcity of food, and you're raising a child or you're taking care of your grandmother or grandfather or your elderly mother or father, there is no other choice but to leave, and you're going to do everything in your power to leave, no matter the consequences, no matter how hard or treacherous the journey is. And that's the reality for a lot of it, for all immigrants, I'd have to say. I mean, some immigrants are luckier than others and have more wealth than others, but just looking at the actual state of an immigrant's mind and what drives them to go away from their homeland, which they obviously do not want to leave because it's their culture. They're used to it. They have connections. They have networks. They have a job. They have security. This wide disarray, which is causing the immigration, it's truly horrible, and it's truly it's evil to the people who have to go through this, because you never see the people causing immigration having to move. You see the victims of it, and these victims largely outnumber the provokers.
So if we see this constant case of either, in the case of Venezuela, the government, or in the case of the Middle East, a terrorist group performing an act of terrorism, or there's a huge inequality, or whatever condition that makes people to leave due to scarcity or whatever, do you think that then the rest of the community, the other states, do we have the right in the name of people being affected to intervene? Or what should we do?
Okay. Someone else wants to add to this?
Okay. Well, so I think, this is gonna bit of a history lesson here, but
Oh, I thought you were going to be controversial for a second. I got excited.
I could be. It depends on the way you think. Donald Trump in 2018 and 19 suggested that there would be a military intervention in Venezuela to end the Maduro regime. And he had a discussion with all of the Latin American countries regarding removing Maduro through force. Yet, I don't believe this is the proper solution. Why? Because for the revolution that the Venezuelan people are looking for, you need to have the revolution from within. You can't. But this is my first reason. I have two reasons. When we look at Venezuela, we look at years since I moved to Peru, which is 7 years ago. We're looking at 7 years of hyperinflation, poverty, of extreme inequality and extreme poverty that these poor people have had to endure. And we see that there was no outside help. And we're seeing that due to this, the Venezuelan people have been forced to unite together. And although they haven't been able to do that completely yet, in part due to outside intervention, but also in part due to the strategic nature of Maduro's regime, and well, that's another discussion. But Maduro's strategic hindsight regarding this issue has really caused the dissolution of the revolution, because we saw in 2019 that there was almost a coup d'etat against Maduro, but some people who were government officials at the time pulled out and told Maduro about this. So the military intervened, and it was an epic failure. But the second reason why is because Donald Trump, when he stated that he would have this intervention, declared that the person in charge would be someone who is in charge of the American military interventions in the civil wars of Central America. And I don't, but my father had experienced the civil wars in Central America as a citizen from El Salvador, and he actually fought for the FMLN, or the Frente Farabundo Martí para la Liberación Nacional, to end the military dictatorship, which was supported by the United States and which was repressing the people of El Salvador for over 60 years. And when we look at the tactics employed by the United States in trying to disarm the FMLN and Nicaragua's revolution, we can see that the amount of civilian casualties and the disregard for the value of human life employed by this person, who is now supposed to be in charge of the Venezuelan offensive, it's incredulous, it's an embarrassment, and it shows how little U.S. foreign policy actually cares about these developing countries, and how, in the end, the United States' conservative foreign policy the only thing they have in mind is creating banana republics such as Panama, the country we're living in, which can serve the economy of the United States, which could launder money for the people in charge in Washington and in Wall Street, and which will just increase the economic fortitude of the United States as a whole. And once again, regarding immigration, this military intervention in El Salvador caused a country of what, there were 6 million people at the time, or 4 million, I think, and 1 million, so 1/4 of the country immigrated to the United States because of this war. This is an incredible fact, because it just shows how brutal the war was, and how, although the people supported the FMLN, which was a party, which was a guerrilla group, which ultimately failed when it came to power and was an epic embarrassment for the advances they had made in ending a military regime, these people still felt the necessity to move away, even though the military regime was being defeated, because they saw that the tactics employed by the military had a disregard for human life, and they were killing, raping, torturing children, women, elderly, and of course men. But obviously you're gonna keep in mind the elderly and the children and the women. And actually, my granduncle was in charge of the biggest massacre in El Salvadoran history, the El Salvadoran massacre. I mean, the El Mozote massacre, which killed over 600 people, and he's still seen by some people in El Salvador who are proxies for the United States institutionalism in the country as a hero. And basically, this immigration, which was seen by El Salvador during this time, caused the rise of gangs in LA, such as MS-13 and Calle 18, and which caused the spread of violence across Central America through these different gang wars. So, and this just goes back to Donald Trump and the populist movement, which goes against immigration and which demonizes immigration for being such a treacherous act. They're all rapists. They're all gang members. No, because the United States played a huge role in creating these gangs and in creating this insecurity and economic and governmental disarray in Central America and Latin America. So you can't totally blame these countries who were weak to start off with and who the United States made weaker. You have to blame the culprit for this, which was conservative United States foreign policy in Central America, which caused a mass immigration, which caused violence, which caused all of these negative factors, which we still see today. And you just have to say, no, that cannot happen in Venezuela. And no, we will not let this happen in Venezuela while there is a Trump, while there is a Trump government. And probably we should just be funding these people through money, not through military, not through tactics. We should be letting them do it on their own, because that is what a true revolution is. When you look at the United States Revolution, did they have help from the outside? Yes. But was it through force? No. It was through the economic help of French. They sent money, which in turn helps create boats. They sent money, which in turn helps create guns. And this kind of intervention doesn't cause the intervention. This didn't cause the intervention of France into the United States, because you saw that there was a strong country who was able to overthrow a European power. And if we apply these same ideals, which the United States was supposed to represent, to Venezuela through helping them economically, I believe that this would not only help the economy once the revolution has ended and life has come back to normal, but we'll be able to see that not only will the Venezuelans come back, but more business will come back, because we all know that Venezuela has vast reserves of oil, and we all know that it is the most profitable. It is one of the most profitable Latin American countries. There's no doubt of that. And if you make these oil reserves public, then you'll be able to create more jobs. You'll be able to boost the economy at a faster rate, and you'll be able to bring in more foreign business, which are able to invest and in turn create a higher GDP for the country.
So then seeing how, for example, having military intervention in an issue, even though it violates, let's say, human rights or provokes immigration that we talked about before, we can see how even this intervention provokes even more chaos and can lead to even more chaotic events. So then this is something that I've brought up quite a few times, and you can ask people in my global politics class, because I do advocate for it a lot. But there's a school of thought that's developing called conditional sovereignty, in which it respects a country's sovereignty, but then when the government of that nation cannot sustain or uphold those rights, is becoming harmful or cannot find a solution or is a problem, then what happens is that that sovereignty is put into a third party, in which, in my opinion, is due to neutrality, or the closest thing to neutrality should be like an organization like the UN. That's my personal opinion. But it puts the sovereignty to a third party, and then it's returned to the country once it's stable and the problem is, let's say, solved. Would you say that this is more an appropriate answer, an appropriate attitude that we should implement in our society and our politics and our culture, rather than investing in the conflict?
Andres, I think you're the one most prepared to answer this, because you definitely have the most knowledge on this topic out of the four of us.
Erase, please.
So, for me, going back to what Andres said about Venezuela, we can clearly see another example of a revolution that didn't exactly fail, but was in a way incorrect. Would be the same revolution that happened in South America when the Spaniards were conquering it, and all South America joined forces to take them out of here. So when that happened, I'm going to use the example of Peru. They relied completely on outside forces to help them battle, and when they conceded and when actually got to kick out the Spaniards from South America, they didn't know what to do, as they didn't have a plan for it. So what I'm saying is, as well, that we shouldn't help Venezuela in a way in military power. We have always other examples in the past that have caused more problems than help at the end, because the people that actually stay living in that country don't know how to manage it at the end, because they didn't have a plan for it. They were only trying to revolutionize it with the help of outsiders.
Okay, so thank you for those last remarks, Reyes. So I think that we have finally reached the end of the podcast. So I will thank all the listeners. If you got to this point, I congratulate you. And is somebody say something funny for the end, please?
Make sure to return and listen to Pickle BoyZ every Tuesday at night. Just keep checking your SoundCloud, people.
Okay. I think it will be a miracle if we keep the every Tuesday thing, but sure. And that wasn't funny, by the way.
I was just doing the thing, the outro.